Hello again, dear ones. Reverend Robert with you over here.
Rev Z right here.
And this is New Thought Today for Tuesday, January 31st. Oh my God, Z, where did the month of January go?
Yeah, it slipped through all that snow that's been falling in Colorado, I'm sure.
The colder it is,
I'm sure that's what happened.
the colder it is, the faster we tick off those days on the calendar, I think might be part of it.
Yes, no doubt.
Grateful that you're with me here today, folks. If you're watching with us, whether live or at another time, thank you for being with us and a part of what we're doing here on the New Thought Media Network. We do this every Tuesday afternoon. Z and I get together and we have a conversation about, well, where is New Thought headed? What does the future look like? And I hope we get to dive into some of the conversations that are happening around the philosophy and the philosophy that is New Thought. So we've got some fun times with you today. Good afternoon, Wayne. Glad to see you, sir. Good to know you're with us. Anyone else that's out there chatting along or watching along, be sure, please feel free, drop a comment, let us know you're watching. Hit the like button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button, hit whatever buttons are available to you, as long as they're more positive and help us reach some more people with what we're doing here today. So, all right. Z, we took a week off last week due to some scheduling things, so it's good to be back. And as it would be, there was a great conversation that evolved on the social networks this week. Actually, I think it all started this morning, and I saw it, introduced you to it. And here's what's going on, folks. And we'd like to kind of talk about what we're seeing here. So, someone went to one of these new AI chat box programs. Z, I haven't played around much with these. Have you dabbled in any of this stuff yet?
Yeah, I've been doing a little dabbling, and it's interesting, no doubt. People are using it to organize thoughts, to get like seed lines, like you're writing a book or journal, kind of that way, either by putting a question in or asking a question, and it gives you its collective website opinion.
Okay.
And it's interesting, right? It's definitely not the end all to be all, because it's like anything else. It's subject to the amount of data and the connectedness of that data across the web. But it also, in my opinion, it has a slant, so far at least, because of the data, toward the proverbial outlook on life on certain things, which brings us to the topic we're going to look at today, in terms of the criticism that someone has found one of the bots talking about in terms of New Thought.
Yes. And so that's exactly it. Someone went into one of these AI machines and typed in the top 5 criticisms of the New Thought philosophy. So what we know is, number one, there's a bias just in the way the question is asked. It's not the top 5 principles. It's not the top 5 great things that happen because of New Thought. It's the criticisms. But we wanted to take a look at these and break this down a little bit. So number one, New Thought philosophy is often criticized for promoting a sense of magical thinking, which suggests that our thoughts can create physical reality. Z, how would you like to start our response to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a criticism that just by, you can tell that the gathering of this information is definitely skewed by the information that's on the internet, right? Because when you go in to look at New Thought, this is what you think. But when we look at the idea of magical thinking, that again, that speaks to something broad, right? To something fanciful or something that's ideal, right? So there's a place in my home state of Florida that's called the Magic Kingdom. The Magic Kingdom was created by magical thinking from Walt Disney. He had an idea that turned into I don't even know how many megas, but it's mega, right? There's a version of Walt Disney something on almost every continent on this planet. And that started with magical thinking. That was his whole idea, was magical thinking. Not in that it's some fanciful thing, but that it is an image, it is a vision, it is a way of thinking with the thought of possibilities as opposed to looking for obstructions as to why something can happen. And so that would be my first critique of that. I mean, if you talk to and primarily I bet with inventors or creators, Walt Disney, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Wozniak, his partner. If you look at these guys who were creatives, I would tend to bet 8 out of 10 of them will tell you if they sat down and said, yeah, it was a kind of a magical thinking. I looked at the realm of possibilities and I said, why not?
Yeah. Now, okay, so I like where you've just taken us, Z, because you bring in a very, very real example of the possibility that magical thinking suggests. And the second part of this first statement is, which suggests that our thoughts can create physical realities. And the way the statement is phrased, it implies that that just isn't true. And our magical thinking or our thoughts can't possibly create our physical realities. However, you've just described an example where it has. Yeah. We would not have computers. It took magical thinking to say, wire this over to this, and let's put this fan in here, and let's put this sort of receptor for data in here, and let's package it all together, and let's call it a PC, a personal computer, or a Mac, or whatever they got out of, right? We would not have any of this type of invention in many aspects of life without the magical thinking. Yeah. So as soon as I read the first one of these, I was like, well, this is kind of almost silly for a computer to bring back that phraseology.
Yeah. And another interesting part is I would be willing to bet some high numbers that everyone that watches this program can think of a situation in their lives where they've had a thought about doing something or whatever. And as a result of that thought, they start seeing more things in common with that or seeing more things that supports it. I mean, that is pretty much, I'll stand on the limb and say that is a ubiquitous experience for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I just flashed on another one, a couple years ago in the early parts of the first year of the pandemic. My youngest wanted to experiment with remote control dune buggy type cars. And so we built a track in our backyard. And we brought in some dirt, we moved some dirt around and we took what was laying around, plywood and other things, and built ramps and built jumps and built landing pads and took that imagination into an experience of some sort. Now, here's the trick, right? I use that term a lot, but it's not a trick. But here's the catch. Are we creating towards something in good and enjoyable and beneficial? Or are we creating something that looks to tear down and looks to tear apart rather than build up?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And one of the things is, and I found, I won't even go into that, but anything that begins to gain some popularity with the populace, if you will, that start hinting at some idea of freedom or some idea of being a free thinker. These are the kinds of criticisms or the kinds of statements that are levied against that idea or that group or that person. I mean, I always like the statement in that regard about Jesus, or you could be Buddha, or a lot of the significant spiritual leaders. They started out, most of them, in a minority of one.
Mm-hmm.
It was one person, so to speak, screaming in the wind, and nobody heard them, nobody listened, nobody paid attention until that magical thinking, so to speak, started getting people to follow them, and things started happening. And we don't even have to talk about turning wine and water. Forget all that. Just about the ability to galvanize people and to make things happen at a communal level, which is what life is all about, I think, or at least high up on the chart in the 1, 2, 3s. We have plenty of evidence. I mean, you look now at quantum physics. Quantum physics, like there's the concept of quantum entanglement, right?
Yes.
And they don't know what it is or how it works, but they do know that, as they say, when two photons of light, and everything on this planet, in this universe, is a light at some level, when two photons of light are correlated, they don't quite know what that means yet, but they're working at it. But once they're correlated, no matter where you put them, so to speak, throughout the universe, the communication between the two photons is instantaneously. And they know that because all other forms of communication, there is a delay. Like you may be seeing a delay on this internet service, or there may be a delay if you're talking on the phone to somebody. Or sometimes, depends on what you're doing with your TV, the voice on the TV may be way ahead of the mouth movement because the audio sound energy moves at a different rate than the video sound energy, right? And so we have enough evidence to point to certain things that we know are legitimate. No one has ever seen gravity. No one has ever seen electricity. Now we have, as the true scientists would say, we have some empirical evidence that if I jump off the building, gravity takes effect, although we don't see it, right? We respect it. No one climbs up to the Brooklyn Bridge and say gravity doesn't exist, I'm gonna jump off. So it begins to be segmented, I think, in a prejudicious way about the nature of reality is what we start looking at.
And this leads us into our second point on our critique here. However, I don't want to skip over the fact that, folks, you might have heard about quantum entanglement in the past week or so in the news. And if you haven't, you're going to, because quantum entanglement as a theory just won a Nobel Prize for physics. And a number of gentlemen are responsible for that. Aspect, John Klein and Anton Zellinger were awarded a Nobel Prize for. So quantum entanglement, let's straight up, is no longer really a theory at this point. When you give it a Nobel Prize, I got to think that it's scientific evidence at this point. And that's the second big critique. Is it also criticized? It's also criticized for a lack of scientific evidence to back up its claims. And this is something, Z, I've been hearing since I walked through the door 20 years ago. And now, even 20 years ago, there was anecdotal evidence, and I myself will preach and do consistently. And if you invite me to your church, I'll preach it very hard. However, 20 years, I have improved this in the science of my own life. Yeah, that's not a quote. Not going to publish that in a journal. But it seems like we constantly run into this, well, there's no real evidence. And yet, every time we seem to turn around, there's another thread. I'm thinking of the God particle, and now here this, and studies of meditation and mindfulness that have lowered crime rates, and as quote, flawed or not as they may be, experiments on water and all. Does this even deserve a response? That critique?
Yes, it does. Yeah, because we want to strike the line through this one so it never comes up again. right?
Okay.
Because,
Well, it's going to come up all
because
day on the slide. Yeah.
we have two institutes right now. HeartMath, the HeartMath Institute up in Boulder, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And we have IONS, the Institution of Noetic Sciences out in California. And part of their sole purpose is to do exactly this scientific thing. I like, if you haven't checked out IONS, the Institute of Noetic Science out in California, that was created, sponsored, and in the initial realms funded by Edgar Mitchell, one of the astronauts who was the first one to go do, navigate the moon. They created a science, an institute rather, of noetic science to look at just this scientific stuff, and they have reams of it in terms of how thought affects random generators and how certain modes of behavior affect certain energy patterns. When you look at HeartMath looked at brain and heart entanglement, right? How you can get the beat of your heart and the frequency of your mind to create a certain resonance and a certain frequency that produces certain changes in the body physically. I mean, if we go all the way back to Larry Dorsey, if y'all remember him, when he was up in Boston, I think at Boston University or Boston Hospital, and he started first doing these studies about cancer and meditation. That study, that's over 30 years ago, right? And we look at that now. One of the first things they tell you when you step into a cancer kind of a program, your thoughts, your emotional settings, that stuff matters. It creates a resonance in your body because we know for sure that certain thought patterns create certain electromagnetic responses in the brain and releases certain chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, melatonin. And we know that these things can be controlled by thought. I won't be sarcastic. We know this scientifically. So to say that there's not enough that is magical thing, there's enough criticism, I mean, there's not enough scientific evidence. Well, it may not be enough to convince everybody, but there's definitely enough for them to continue to put money in those evidences right now.
There we go. So, folks, that website is IONS. That's the organization. Their website is noetic.org, noetic.org. You can visit them, give them some of the love and attention they deserve. So I'm with you, Z, right? It's not that there isn't evidence or that we lack evidence. It's that the evidence is in places where maybe people aren't looking, or they're just not willing to look at it and do a full research. And do a full broad spectrum look at what's available and what's out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's one of the challenges we're going to have with the chat bots, right? AI chat bots. If we go out and start asking these questions, it's only going to be limited to the sources that it has access to. So and that will be swayed, if you will, or kind of dictated a little bit by the prevailing culture and thought at that time, right? Because we know when you put a website out there, if nobody starts looking at that website over time, that thing gets further and further down in your search engine, right? And so, in 10 years, if I haven't been to that site, I look for it. It may not find it, or it may take a while to find it. So, there's this thing in New Thought about this oneness, right? And we know that it's all connected, but it also understands what is in front of it right now, right? If I put my hand in fire, although there's a whole lot of things going on in my body, the first thing it's going to think about is not that I may have to use the bathroom. It's going to say, your hand's on fire. We need to deal with that first.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. It's now, and here's, so I want to give New Thought some of the props too. Not only is this really kind of a baseless accusation in some regards. I guess we're addressing that regardless here. I could go on for days of places where something came into my life, and rather than just react through uncontrolled or unchecked emotion, rather than reacting through anger and fear, rather than all of that, able to respond in a way that says, okay, how do we control what we experience here? This is what has occurred. I cannot change what has occurred. And I had a very deep conversation with someone this week. Is that suffering even necessary? How long do I need to be in that place of suffering that, okay, this occurred, before I'm allowed to move into what do I want to do with this? And what I want to do with this, it's got to be based on our spiritual practices. That's one of the critiques we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. It's down farther on the list. But it is that experience that I believe deepens our spiritual practice, and again creates more evidence for ourselves that the principles we're using work.
Yeah. And so, when I look at the third critique that it comes up with, this thing about believing that it leads to complacency, where people become too focused on their own thoughts and not taking actions. Well, I can say that about any teaching, and I get this, that people can get self-absorbed, but I would submit that right now in our culture, after coming out of the cave of the pandemic, this is a problem everywhere, not just in New Thought. At work, at churches, at synagogues, at mosques, at basketball leagues, at tennis courts. People had an awakening or remembrance, if you will, during this time to remember that, hey, if I'm sick, I can't help anybody, right? But if you go too deeply into that and not understand the oneness of it all, which is what New Thought teaches, there is a oneness in the whole universe, then you can become complacent. You become so self-absorbed, so concentrated on yourself that you try to isolate everything else, which you can't do. And now you create a bigger problem, right? I stay inside. I don't go outside. Now, the only thoughts I got running around in my head are my own. And pretty soon I can make everything seem plausible, or I can make everything seem as if it's happening, right? And so, and complacency, I mean, just the thought of magical thinking and complacency, as they have two critiques, that don't even go together.
Right. Well, I'm with you. This can happen in any faith tradition. It can happen in any philosophy. It happens in our jobs. It can happen in relationships where we become complacent in what's going on and forget that there's more than just me within the one.
Yes.
And all that is people forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, so is this a critique, or is this a trap? Is this a blind alley that anyone could end up in, regardless of what they follow or what they believe? And can we? And I think we have the key to avoid this, actually, in being in community.
And I would say it's first and foremost, it is this thing called reality. Complacency is something that right now, if you will, relatively, all of the plants are complacent in a place where there's absolute cold, right? Bears or animals that hibernate are complacent right now as a natural phenomenon in the universe based on who and what that thing is, right? So it's complacency. I mean, here's the challenge I think we have. Our society has become so either or, so black and white, that we put these stark examples out there, and we don't allow for the movement, which we know is happening every day, to be quantified or qualified. And so we put these stark things like complacency. When you go to sleep at night, you are complacent. And if you don't become complacent, it starts affecting your heart and your weight and your blood pressure. So, to say that kind of skews things. And I think you gave the best example in terms of relationships, which everything is a relationship, right? If that relationships if you are with your partner and you get so absorbed in yourself, then things are going to start happening different.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do. You can get so involved in work or so involved in the kids or so involved in your health and block everything else out, which creates another kind of a problem. So the more we can take the complacency, go to sleep when we need to, and wake up and do activity when we need to, the better. And I'll get off that soapbox.
No, because I think because you're going to lead us right back around to a real answer. But before I get there, I have to remind you that we're supposed to set a pizza date for you and your wife and myself and my wife. We're supposed to set a pizza date. We keep forgetting to do that. So after the show,
so let's do it.
We'll take care of that.
Yes.
So let's follow this thing of complacency. What happens once somebody becomes complacent in something? Let's stay with the relationship idea. You become complacent, you start looking somewhere else for fun. You start looking somewhere else to meet the needs that you feel you have. And if we're going to let that happen in a spiritual community, well, I don't want you going somewhere else to get your needs met. So it is in our best interest to help people avoid that trap and to stay engaged. Now, again, it's been a long road for the last few years, folks. We get it. So if it seems that New Thought and other spiritual communities are on the decline, now data may have shown that was true before the pandemic and may just be reinforcing itself. We look at, I'm going to steal Z's line here because he's usually the guy that gets to this first. We got to look at it from that whole system perspective, that this is one aspect, and we have the answer to that aspect by, I believe, creating beloved community, creating engaged New Thought communities.
Yeah, and I would tag that, in this complacency thing. It kind of, I don't know. I have to look deeply into that and how they come up with that. Well, I'll just but I'm looking now, and I'm going to take a page out.
Computers already look deeply, and that's what they came up with.
Right. So I'm just going to take a current event, and hopefully I'm not out of turn. But if we look at the incident that happened down in Tennessee with the officers and the young man, complacency is not what's being shown around the globe, or at least around the North American continent, in terms of what people are asking for, what people are getting engaged in or involved. Now, so there was a time when that would have been a little more complacent about it, but not anymore. Now you have multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multiracial, multi-gendered individuals who are no longer complacent. They have woken up, as in the Rip Van Winkle thing. Rip went to sleep and woke up 20 years later, and everything had changed. He said, "Oh, I got to get involved here." I went to bed, King George was on the picture, and I woke up, George Washington was on the picture. So now this whole thing of it's not just New Thought that's been complacent. Everybody has been complacent across the globe, because everyone was thinking this me thing. But now we're beginning to see with the technology and the computers and the access that everything is connected, and we can no longer be complacent anymore, because if we do, it threatens the survival of this whole planet.
Right. So again, folks, we're going to see aspects of all these things to some degree in any spiritual community if we look closely enough, if we look deeply enough. we're going to see any of these things. What I'm seeing so far is critiques that are part of human nature, if you will. And it's not necessarily the path of creation, as it is slipping from that path into sometimes a path of division. And all of these statements have been set up with an either or kind of outcome. Each one of these critiques has it points to a shadow aspect, if you will, as well as an aspect of the light. So it's always easy. It's always easier to slip into the shadow than it is to maintain the light. But who better than us, than New Thoughters, to maintain the light? Maybe that's egotistical as a New Thought philosopher, as a New Thought mystic, as a New Thought adherent, whatever you want to call ourselves. But
and ego has gotten a bad rap, right? Because if I get it, right? People can become too ego driven, but without an ego, you have no personality, right? Without an ego just speaks to the selfness of the person, right? It becomes egotistical when that's all I think about is myself.
Right.
But it is my ego that gives me my character to a lot of degree, my personality, my humor, the different aspects. Ego is the composite of those things that make us human in terms of interaction. So I mean, I think
can point us towards where we can do the most good,
without a doubt.
If we tune into that, if we tune into, hey, this is pointing me into a place where I can do the most good.
And so that kind of leads to the next thing, right? Where it says, others believe that the New Thought philosophy is too individualistic and can encourage people to be selfish and ignore the needs of others. Well, again, here's the thing that's prevalent throughout the globe and how people have hoarded knowledge, resources, taken advantage of others people's resources because they think they know better, and that because someone may look not as sophisticated or whatever as they are, so I know best because look at I've done this, that, and the other. Let me take care of these resources for you. And then they wind up enslaving people or disrespecting the resource or the source of the resource, if you will. And then we got problems. Yep. I just saw a program today where they have companies that are buying up land here in Colorado, large swaths of land, like 2,500 acres, just to get the water rights. So that as water becomes more scarce, they have control of this massive amount of water that they can commoditize as to who gets it, what it costs, how it's used, because that's an egotistical, detrimental kind of thinking.
Right. Rather than we need to put this aside, help protect this for the betterment of all. There was an ethics of the commons at one point, and there was a belief that we needed to keep the commons open and available, and yet we see the capitalism creeping in some regards. We see that a new version of the old belief.
Yeah, exactly. And when ignore an exuberant amount of emphasis on material things and material success. I mean, if we look at commercials and advertisements and the emphasis on a lot of those fuel this kind of thinking, and that if you have this kind of car, your ego gets pumped, you get more whatever. If you have this kind of job, or if you live in this kind of place, or if you take these kind of trips, I mean, it's all geared, or I won't say all geared, but a lot of it is geared towards material things, and we need resources. We're not going to be ignorant about the fact. Right. But how do we figure out? I mean, when is enough enough? I mean, like you do have some billionaires now who are moving in a more altruistic way that they're saying, well, I'm going to give all this money away by the time I die, right? Recirculate. Sure. Okay, that's a great thing. And you know, we encourage more people to do that because we don't want to penalize those magical thinking people who created. I mean, I used to work with the space shuttle. When I think about what SpaceX has done with sending a rocket up and then landing that thing on a platform in the water, I know what that takes. That ain't no easy job. That's some magical thinking, believe me. and so it is now kind of revolutionary. Revolutionized this whole idea of going back into space. So you know, we have to begin to look at life in a wholeness, as you were saying, and this give and take of that's how we move. That's how things happen. And so and we will have, you know, for the mathematical folks, we will have the standard deviation and the outliers, right? Who fall outside the standard deviation. No judgment on one side or the other. That's this life. And it's often those outliers that either become antagonists to the general populace who become complacent because they're in the norm that wakens them back up to get a redistribution. And right now, I believe we're in a redistribution, and we got to get some more plots on the graph so we can figure out what the new standard deviation is and figure out what the outliers are.
I'm not sure if I'm an outlier or a standard deviation, but folks, if you wonder what you've wandered in here to, this is New Thought Today. It happens Tuesdays on the New Thought Media Network. My dear brother, Reverend Elzia, and I get together and have conversations such as this. We also invite guests in. If you'd like to be a guest on the program, drop us an email, info@ntmedia.org. Or if you have a guest suggestion, if you'd like somebody you'd like to see us have on the conversation, come in on the studio and join us for a conversation, please let us know that as well. All right, let's keep going here. We got to plow through. Finally, the New Thought philosophy is often criticized for its focus on material gain and success, which can lead to a lack of spiritual development.
You know, I mean, there's the statement that says the root of all evil is not money, it's the lack thereof, right?
Or the love thereof.
Yes. It's about perspective. And it's not just New Thought. We have, as they say now, the prosperity gospel across, you know, various traditions of religious teachings. And again, it is about as the Tao teaches, it is about the yin and the yang. It is about the balance. It is about how do we, again, and the Tao has this so down pat. How do we begin to look at life in a balanced, ever moving approach, right? So, because the yin and yang, it implies a certain movement that as one thing crescendos, it falls over into a pianissimo, if you will, and starts again. And so it creates this cycle that looks to keep balance. When one thing gets too balanced, it just falls off. And then and that is, I mean, when you look at us, I mean, the human body, we come in as a small infinitesimal thing, and we get to this, and then we fall over.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of money to make it from point A to point B. Plain and simple. Like, to me, this whole critique does not take into in any way the account of the fact that we are both the human and the divine. And yes, again, any adherent of any philosophy can fall into the trap of thinking this is only about making more money or amassing more money or becoming the richest dude on the block or whatever it may be. And the human reality is that if my basic financial needs are not being met, then I'm spending time concerned about that rather than time focused on how do I best serve. When I know that the work that I do, that the way I interact with the world, I am being rewarded, and that my life is an aspect, an outpicturing of divine prosperity, then I get to live from a place where I know I can give my gifts and be rewarded. And it makes life easier to just know that you can be sustained and have money. But like any one of these criticisms, if you take it too far, if you take any one of these things too far, if you take being selfish too far, if you take being altruistic for others too far, if you don't pay any attention to money and only spend time in spiritual development, you're going to have a hard time paying for the classes that you want to take to develop your spirituality. I feel like the AI set everybody up on this one.
Well, and as I was just thinking, I was coming to a different conclusion, thinking, okay, this is great, right? Because for all true New Thought / metaphysicians across the globe, they should look at this and do a self-examination and say, okay, I don't believe this. What can I do? How do I contribute to this to disavow these statements, to make them null and void, to show them that, yeah, just like with anything, you give me a system or ideology or philosophy, I can hurl these comments against any of them.
Yeah.
But the question becomes, how do we substantiate, those of us who've had the experiences, those of us who have magical done the work, right, to substantiate things that are not easily obtained by those who don't do the work, so that the gap between the is and the is not becomes closer and closer until we make it so palatable, so exciting, so obtainable, and that the evidence is there in more of abundance that people begin to run to this idea. I mean, we talked about the fusion, about correlation of photons. If somebody was asleep last week, the week before last, they would have missed that they have now in a laboratory been able to come up with nuclear fusion. Right? They correlated two atoms together as opposed to blowing them apart to get nuclear energy. They have got fusion now, where they fuse two photons or atoms together, and they had that, right? And so now, again, that was something that was talked about way back with Tesla.
Yeah.
Right? And so now we have to begin to look at these things. It's almost like the Paul Masson was served no wine before his time. Until we are consciously and otherwise ready for some of this technology and information to be presented, it's not coming.
Yep. So let's take each one of these and flip them. The New Thought philosophy is celebrated for promoting the possibility of magical thinking and encourages people to create the reality they desire. It is celebrated for its growing body of evidence that is scientifically proving the claims that have been made. It is leading to a greater sense of letting our inner thoughts guide our outward actions, and allowing this magical thinking to guide our actions, not from emotion, not from raw manipulation, but from a deeper sense of inner thought. We are celebrating that the New Thought philosophy is encouraging people to take care of themselves and meet their own needs as they continue to embrace and help the others meet their needs. And we are celebrating that we can focus on both the material gain, which allows us the freedom to live a spiritually expansive life.
Man.
And I ain't even AI, man. Somebody give me a job. Where I need my own chat engine, I think.
That's great because that's what we have to, when we look at things that have been exciting rather, that's been creative, someone took statements like these and did exactly what was done by you there, flipped the script on it and came up with something that everybody has said this. Why didn't I think of that? Because you didn't have no magical thinking. You had gloom and doom. You had all these obstacles as to why it couldn't be done. And the person that made it happen was looking at how it can be done.
Right.
And that's where we need to move in every atmosphere, in every sphere of life. Mm-hmm. I mean, just think about, again, I hate to bring current events, but I think to help it, just look at the madness that is about to go on the debt ceiling.
Right.
Somebody is thinking magical, if you will, that says, hey, we can figure this out. Of course, we don't want to continue to go in debt, but we know if we don't get some good model for this debt to be handled, 8 million people may be out of work. Our military won't be able to get paid. Social Security checks may not run. Medicaid may not be available. Right. And so, yeah, you're going to have people say, all right, well, but those people who are saying that stuff doesn't matter are the people who are worried about getting paid.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's like, I already got my $175,000 here in Congress, and what can I say? What can I, and I'm being a little facetious and tongue in cheek, but we have to begin to flip. We have to get out of this either or thinking, this black and white thinking, because in reality, there's all shades of gray in there.
And not to accuse anybody directly,
no,
but this came from an AI, but it was shared by a human. And it was a human that decided to put this out and say, hey, what do you all think? And what I saw in the responses is there are generally one of two types of responses. And one is to jump on the bandwagon that this proves, and this points to the fall of New Thought, the invalidity of New Thought. And what I also notice is most of those people are people that have, by their own admission, left New Thought. And I publicly said, I don't believe this stuff. So if you publicly don't believe it, you're never going to see the proof that's in the pudding, as it were. And there are a growing number of people saying, I'm not buying this. Let's look at the good that has happened in the world because of New Thought. There are groups of practitioners in the Ukraine holding up consciousness against an oppressive invasion by Russia of their country. There are practitioners all over this planet using magical thinking to envision what a world that works for all life really looks like and how that can actually happen. And the minute that you're on, again, here we are building up or tearing down.
Yeah. And I look at this, I'm kind of saying, okay, I can get with this. This is, for me, this is a call to action. This is for a statement or a series of questions and responses, rather, or critiques, that for all true New Thought metaphysicians to take a stance right now and say that, hey, I have direct experience of these principles, truths, practices working in my life. My call to action is to go out and individually, if they're working individual, or collective, if they're within a larger community or leading a community, to say, I'm gonna make it my call to action to find one or more of these things and disavow them, or not disavow them, or better, to disprove them. And there's enough stuff there. And I hate to say disprove even, because that gets me falling back into this either or thinking. I mean, our language is so wroth with one or the other, pitting one thing against the other, as opposed to trying to find the common ground.
Right. All right. So here's what we used to do a thing with our students. I don't know if this still happens or not. But when I got involved with this philosophy 20 years back, you were getting class and you had to come up with documented demonstrations. Actually, this was in practitioner training. So it was after you got through the basics. But you had to come up with documented demonstrations of where you put this principle to its test. And we do that through the power of positive thinking and affirmations and spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get really lazy and we just call it prayer, and that confuses everybody else out there in the world. Everybody else thinks that we're talking about begging and beseeching some far off power to bless us at the cost or detriment of others. No. So we want to hear your demonstrations. We want to hear where you have put this principle to the test. Maybe this becomes a regular segment on this show, Z. This would be good. Where you've put this principle to the test and experienced a demonstration in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that you will amaze yourself at how often this stuff actually works, because it works all the time.
Yeah.
If you work,
I remember that there is an aspect of our teaching about prosperity. Prosperity does not just mean money, right? Or does not just mean things. And so there was this exercise on unexpected income, right?
Yep.
Unexpected good, where things happen. Someone just unbeknownst to you came and provided you with some help or some service or some resources that you were not expecting, although you were kind of hoping that something would happen or not, right? And it would be, that is a great starting point for people to get into the practice of journaling and writing these down, because if you do it regularly enough, and that regular could be once a week or once a day. I mean, everybody has to find their own rhythm, if you will. But then you begin to see, if you're honest enough with yourself, how things, you had a thought, you had a concern, you had a joy or a celebration, and how things fell in line or not with those ideas that were put forth in the universe.
Yeah.
It'd be great. It's a great exercise that we should actually start looking at that. I like that.
Yes. I think folks, if you're willing to take the challenge, send us your proof. Really, and it's not because you need to prove it to us. Mm-mm. You're really only ever proving this to yourself. And I can't remember when it was that I crossed over the threshold from when it was hopeful thinking and a hopeful prayer to the point where it was, no, this is the way it is. It was a faithful prayer. It was the trusting prayer. It was the affirmation of this is the way it is. So this is the way it must be.
And here's a capstone. We do these exercises because there is no amount of explaining or any of that will get the job done. There is no way I can explain to you what a mango tastes like.
Right.
I can describe colors and textures and all kinds of attributes, if you will, of a mango. But until you actually taste the mango, you have no idea of what I'm talking about. And now the challenge becomes, cause and effect, if you will, are not always closely related. People think, oh, I did this and it didn't happen. Well, there's some other, it's not just one thing. It's that you have to be in alignment. It's like driving a stick shift. For me to go from first gear to second gear, I got to get the brake, the gas, the clutch, the shift gear. All that stuff has to be in line for it to happen. I can't just shift the gear, don't put the clutch down and say, well, I shift the gear, it didn't work. Well, there's some other things that got to be in alignment. And when we can do that, we begin to see, oh, I can drive manual. And it's a lot of fun. And I got more whatevers, right? And so it's the same thing with this. We have to practice it. You have to taste that mango. And, if I got a cold and my taste buds and the whole sensory system might not taste a mango the way it's supposed to be. But that's just how it goes. I have to wait till my cold get away. I have to get rid of my cold. And then, I see a mango now.
We're talking about mangoes, folks, on New Thought today. I'm Rev Briz. This is my dear brother, Rev Raelzia. You never know where we're going to go or where we're going to end up. However, I think we've done an admirable job of discussing the AIs, the artificial. That's why it's not a real intelligence. See, that's why they're calling it artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence came up with these critiques. The authentic and real and true intelligence recognizes that that's not how it's working, that there is something different, something more, something bigger happening out there. Along with that, we want to share with you folks, if you're interested, Reverend LZ and I are going to be starting a very unique program. Call it Embracing Beloved Community. It's a 2-hour program on the third Thursday of each month from February through November. So there's 10 sessions, 2 hours apiece. Now, there are things to do in between and there are some things to contemplate. However, what we want to look at is how we're creating powerful relationships in growing beloved community and activating a vision of all these things we talk about and more. Z, I'll tell you, I am super excited to get a group together and really take a deep dive into this topic, this material, and more importantly, setting ourselves up for a movement into embracing and living and creating beloved community.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. More than ever, again, using these big old statements across the globe, the idea of community is more apparent than any other time. Right now, we have so much need for community, for people to come together and share and help and celebrate and all the things that go along with those, that we need some emissaries to step up and say, I'm gonna carry the torch. It's it's kind of like when you have the Olympics, right? They carry that torch. They start in one country and they run all around the globe, passing the torch. And so that's what we want to start doing. We want to get ready for this Paris Olympics. I think the next summer one in anyway, and start passing this baton, this light of beloved community, so that everyone, as one of our mantras, a world that works for everything.
Yeah. The
plants, the waters, the people, the sky, the rocks. The rocks. Yeah. If we start over mining lithium, which is a whole thing now with the electric batteries, there's going to be a challenge there. So we have to. Everything is important. Everything matters. And when we look at a community perspective on these things, we begin to get them in the right place, in the right balance, so that we continually open ourselves to the divine and to a loving situation.
Mm-hmm. Amen, brother. And folks, we have about run out of time. So we're going to let that be our final thoughts for the day. Thank you for being with us here on the New Thought Media Network, New Thought Today. Please like, share, and subscribe. Let your friends know what we're doing and tune back in again. We are now also a podcast, so check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, we wish you peace and richest blessings. Bye now.